In the global economy, a new stage of confrontation is beginning, one that could radically reshape the financial balance of power among allies. And the source of this threat is not China, as many are used to thinking, but Japan, one of the most important pillars of the US in the Pacific. For the first time in modern history, Tokyo has moved to genuinely tough measures against Washington, striking directly at the sphere where America feels most vulnerable: the dollar-based financial system and the gold reserves stored abroad. According to sources in the Japanese Ministry of Finance, cited by several authoritative Asian outlets, Japan's new government has decided to use an unprecedented mechanism to counter the tariffs imposed by Donald Trump. Tokyo announced the sale of part of its gold reserves that for many years had been stored in the US under the management of American depository structures. This decision shocked the world and stunned the White House because the Japanese effectively found a way to offset the tariff impact by shifting the financial burden onto Trump himself. If China pressures the US through government debt and rare earth metals, Japan has chosen to strike at the very foundation of American financial power, the gold that underpins confidence in the dollar as the world's reserve currency. And all of this is happening just as relations between Trump and Tokyo had begun to improve. Yet despite this thaw, Trump did not lift the tariffs against his closest ally. A serious political rift is now emerging between the countries. After the arrival of Japan's new government, which is more hardline and focused on national interests, relations with Washington have cooled rapidly. Only recently, Japan was called America's most loyal ally, ready to support any US strategy in the region, from confronting China to imposing sanctions on Russia. But now the situation has changed. Trump imposed higher tariffs on Japanese automobiles and electronics, the key pillars of Japan's economy. And in Tokyo, this was seen as a betrayal. And after the American president publicly accused Japan of trade parasitism and claimed that Japanese companies were stealing American jobs, it became clear in Tokyo that expecting concessions from this administration was pointless. It was at that moment, according to insiders in Japan's financial sector, that a planning group was formed to examine hidden financial levers of pressure on the US. One of these levers was the possibility of selling off the gold assets that Japan had historically kept in New York as part of its currency and financial reserves. No state had previously dared to use gold so openly as a weapon in a trade war against the US, which is why the effect turned out to be far more significant than expected. Analysts at Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi, cited by Nikkei Asia, argue that the Japanese found a gap in American regulations. Formally, these gold assets belong to Japan and can be liquidated without Washington's approval. Legally, the US cannot block the sale without endangering the reputation of American depositories, which serve as the global storage base for the world's wealth. And this is where the main blow lies. Japan is forcing the market to question whether the gold stored in the US is truly safe. Could the White House freeze it for political purposes? These questions have already entered the agenda, and Financial Times has called the situation the most serious crisis of confidence in American gold since the end of the gold standard. And now imagine the scale of the impact. Japan is the world's third largest economy. Its gold and currency reserves are among the largest on the planet, and if it begins transferring gold back to national vaults in Tokyo and Kyoto, or selling it off to cover tariff losses, this creates a dangerous precedent for all other US allies. Behind the scenes, there is already discussion that South Korea and Italy have long been considering repatriating their gold as well. Germany already took a similar step a few years ago by retrieving part of its reserves from New York. If this process becomes widespread, the financial authority of the US could suffer a fatal fracture. According to sources in the US National Security Council, this prospect is causing a panic reaction inside the Trump administration. Insiders claim that Trump was furious when he learned about Japan's actions, calling them a stab in the back and even demanding that sanctions against Japanese financial institutions be considered. However, his advisors dissuaded him, realizing that such a response would only accelerate the collapse of trust between allies. Meanwhile, the Japanese government is doing everything possible to present its actions as forced and strictly economic. The Prime Minister states that Japan is not waging a war, but is obliged to protect its economy. Yet between the lines, the main point is clear. Tokyo no longer fears Washington. Over the past weeks, as Bloomberg notes, the Japanese Ministry of Finance has begun actively converting part of the proceeds into euros and gold stored inside the country. This is not just a response to tariffs, but a gradual move away from dollar dependence, a hint of a strategic shift. And all of this is happening amid growing doubts about America's ability to maintain economic leadership in a world of new tariffs, a budget crisis, and slowing growth. With every new step Japan takes, pressure on the White House intensifies. In Washington, they are already saying that if Trump does not immediately lift tariffs on Japanese goods, the situation may spiral out of control. A report by Rand Corporation says that Japan's actions are opening Pandora's box, because now any U.S. ally can use America's own financial infrastructure as leverage against it. Economists warn that if confidence in U.S. gold vaults is undermined, the dollar will face a systemic crisis. Markets already feel the tension. Gold is rising in price, U.S. bond yields are falling, and investors are looking for safer alternatives. And all of this is the result of one decision on the other side of the Pacific, made by an ally tired of being treated like a vassal. Japan no longer intends to remain silent. For the first time in decades, it is ready to use its economic power to defend its own interests. And this step may mark the beginning of the end of the era in which the U.S. dictated the rules to everyone else. If Trump cannot find a way out of this crisis, history may remember this moment as the beginning of global de-dollarization, not from Moscow or Beijing, but from Tokyo. The question is whether he will realize this in time. And the most troubling part, according to Wall Street Journal sources within U.S. intelligence circles, is that Japan's actions may only be the beginning of a much broader strategy. Washington fears that Tokyo may soon start discussing alternative settlement mechanisms with Asian partners, not in dollars, but in yen, or even in new generation digital currencies. This could sharply reduce global demand for the dollar and hit the U.S. ability to finance its enormous budget deficit. Several senior officials, speaking anonymously, told reporters that the administration is holding urgent meeting after urgent meeting. They are even discussing proposals for secret talks with Japan and a partial rollback of tariffs in exchange for returning the gold to American vaults. But in Tokyo, as Japan Times and Nikkei report, they are no longer ready to make concessions. They are convinced that the U.S. has taken advantage of its partner's weakness for far too long and must now face the consequences of its own decisions. And the longer the White House convinces itself that the situation is manageable, the stronger the next blow will be. Because Japan, as one Goldman Sachs Asia analyst put it, has only begun to open its financial artillery and no longer fears pulling the trigger.